Hello and welcome to the Late and Cassette podcast, and today I'll be covering The Mummy, and I'm excited about this one. In the summer of 1999, I was 10 years old, and there were only three things I cared about that summer: Star Wars Episode 1, the WWF, and I don't mean the World Wildlife Fund, and The Mummy. This Mummy is a remake of a 1932 movie of the same name that starred Boris Karloff, Zeta Johnson, David Manners, Edward Van Sloan, and Arthur Byron, and it was directed by Carl Freund, Freund. The 1999 movie has some similarities, such as Imhotep being buried alive and trying to resurrect his dead girlfriend Noxunamun. The original movie also had spin-offs focusing on a different mummy in The Mummy's Hand, The Mummy's Tomb, The Mummy's Ghost, and The Mummy's Curse in the 1940s. Fast forward to 1992. Producers James Jacks and Sean Daniel decided to update the film for a modern audience. Universal gave them the green light as long as the budget was around $10 million. They then recruited Clive Barker, famous for the Hellraiser series, as the studio wanted a horror franchise. But after several meetings, Barker and Universal both lost interest. Next up was Joe Dante, who wanted Daniel Day-Lewis as his mummy, but his version was way over budget and the studio rejected it. George A. Romero came in with a vision of zombie-style horror that he was famous for, and he completed a script in the fall of 1994, but ended up leaving as well, due to his script being too dark, and he was also in negotiation with another studio for another movie. And after he left, a new script was commissioned. Mick Garris was also attached to direct, but left the project as well. Wes Craven was offered the movie, but turned it down. Stephen Sommers called the producers in 1997 and pitched his idea of an Indiana Jones-like action movie. He turned in an 18-page treatment, and the new management at Universal liked it so much they increased the budget from $15 million to $80 million. Filming began in Marrakech, Morocco in May 1998 and lasted over 4 months. They also shot in the Sahara Desert and the United Kingdom. They could not shoot in Egypt due to unstable political conditions. The cast and crew had to deal with sandstorms, snakes, spiders, and scorpions, with some crew having to be airlifted out of location after being bitten. Brendan Fraser nearly died when his character was hanged and had to be resuscitated. The production had the support of the Moroccan army, and the cast members had kidnapping insurance taken out on them, a fact they didn't find out until after the shooting of the movie. Production designer Alan Cameron found a dormant volcano where they constructed the set for Hymenoptera. This set took 16 weeks to build. Another set was built in the UK on the dockyard of Chatham, which was used for the Giza port. The special effects cost $15 million, which ironically was the original budget for the entire movie, and they used motion capture and a combination of live action and computer graphics to create the mummy. And the music was composed by Jerry Goldsmith. Our main cast consists of Brendan Fraser playing Rick O'Connell, originally Tom Cruise, who ended up taking the role in the Mummy reboot in 2017. Brad Pitt, Ben Affleck, and Matt Damon were offered the role, but all turned it down for various reasons. Brendan Fraser came into their consciousness because they were impressed with the box office of George of the Jungle. Rachel Weisz plays Evelyn Carahan, named in tribute to the daughter of Lord Carnarvon's daughter, Evelyn Carnarvon, who were both present when King Tut's tomb was opened in 1922. We have John Hannah as Jonathan, Evelyn's brother, Kevin J. O'Connor as Benny, a former soldier in the French Foreign Legion with Rick, and Oded Fehr plays Ardith Bey, a Magi, who are the secret guards that guard Imhotep's tomb. And Ardith Bay was actually the alias used by Boris Karloff in the original Mummy movie after he's resurrected. Eric Avari as museum curator and Evelyn's boss, Dr. Terence Bay, and Patricia Velasquez as Anoxunamun. The Mummy opened on May 7, 1999 and grossed $43 million in its opening weekend, and it went on to win the box office for the first 2 weeks of its release, until Star Wars Episode 1 came out a couple weeks later. It went on to gross $415 million worldwide against the aforementioned $80 million budget. Now to get into the movie. We begin in 1290 BC. Ancient Egypt with some great visuals. The narrator tells us we are in Thebes, and under the rule of King Seti I, of the 19th dynasty, I believe. The narrator tells us about the love affair between Anoxunamun, who we see enter the room, and she is an entirely gold body paint with some black trim down her arms, so that King Seti can see if anyone has touched her. She goes to meet Imhotep in what we assume is Seti's palace, with his priests acting as lookouts, and they are also in gold body paint for who knows whatever reason. The pharaoh enters and is surprised to see the priests there, so they are actually some shitty lookouts. When he sees Anoxunamun, he asks her who has touched her after seeing a smudge where Imhotep grabbed her shoulder while they were kissing. Instead of trying to explain it away, Imhotep comes out of nowhere, a hiding place I assume, and the pair stab the pharaoh to death. Imhotep's priests quickly enter and usher him away, and Anoxunamun kills herself when the pharaoh's bodyguards enter. Imhotep and his priests later steal her body and go to Hamunaptra to resurrect her with the aid of the Book of the Dead. But they are captured by the Magi before they can finish the ritual. His priests were sentenced to be mummified alive. He, however, was sentenced to the Hamdai. It was so horrible that it was never used until now. His tongue was cut out, and he was placed in a sarcophagus with flesh-eating scarab beetles. He was then buried at the feet of the Egyptian god Anubis. If he were to ever rise, he would be a walking plague. Now that is a terrible curse. I have no idea why they would bestow that curse. We do have a lot of great visuals to open the movie, and a hilarious one is when they have him in the grave and they're burying him. It looks like they're using makeshift shovels made out of wood, but there's no head on it, so it looks like they're just kind of flinging sand down there, which it probably took a good long while to fill that hole up, I can tell you that. But then we cut to 1932 in Hamunaptra, and a battle between the French Foreign Legion and the locals, I guess. I don't know what kind of army it is, but they are about to have a shootout. And it's here we are introduced to Rick O'Connell and the human villain of the film, Benny. Rick shoots everything in sight. Benny runs away before the fighting begins because he is a coward. And I guess it was the general. He left right before that, so that put O'Connell in charge. And I'm not sure what an American is doing in the French Foreign Legion. I'm sure there are reasons, but they end up losing as there are definitely more of the locals. I'm not sure exactly who they are. They never really go into detail, but there's more of them than of the French Foreign Legion. But Rick goes to take cover, but Benny closes a door that locks him out. And then he runs away from, the people shooting him. And we have some Stormtrooper-esque talent going on. They couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. They are just terrible shots. Finally, they do catch up to him, though, and corner him. But they take off in fear just as they are about to shoot him, and they are such terrible shots that I don't think they could have even shot him from 5 feet away. Then Rick hears some strange voices and he turns to see the statue of Anubis, and then a giant face just kind of taking over the sand just flying everywhere. He then runs off as the Magi watch from a cliff in the distance. In 1926, 3 years later, we go to an Egyptian museum slash library, I guess, where we're introduced to Evelyn and she's putting books away. When she goes to put a book on the shelf behind her, she accidentally falls into the giant shelf and it has a domino effect, knocking all the other shelves over. And this is kind of a terrible setup for a library. There's these giant ass shelves and they're all in circles, so it's a visual gag. It's pretty cool. I liked it when I was a kid, when I was 10 years old when I saw it for the first time. She is then scolded by her boss, and we learn her parents are dead in this bit of exposition. She goes back to the exhibits where her older brother scares her with a mummy. He's laying in a sarcophagus, and she thinks she hears voices, and when she goes to look in, he just kind of pushes the mummy up so it looks like it's sat up. And, we get a little bit of banter between them. We learn that Evelyn wants to join the Beveridge Scholars, I believe she calls them, and she references them throughout the movie, but they reject her because she doesn't have enough experience in the field. But then Jonathan shows her a weird puzzle box he found with a map to Hamunaptra in it. She shows it to Terrence Bay, her boss, and she believes it's the seal of King Seti I that is on the map, and that she believes that Hamunaptra, the city of the dead, is on the map. He kind of dismisses it, and he accidentally burns up the part of the map where Hamunaptra is, and tells them not to go because it's many men have died trying to go there, and it's just a fairy tale or, whatever. It's not real, basically. Then we go to Cairo prison. We see O'Connell again, looking very much like George of the Jungle this time. He definitely hasn't had a haircut since we last saw him, I would say. Jonathan admitted to Evie he stole it from O'Connell. And then when Jonathan questions him, O'Connell punches Jonathan because we assume he recognizes him. Then when Evie asks about the location, he grabs her and kisses her and tells her to get him the hell out of there if she really wants to know. She tries to bargain with the warden, who orders the lever to be pulled, pulling the floor out from under O'Connell, when Evie refuses the warden's sexual advances. His neck does not break, however, and we see him struggling. She tells the warden that O'Connell knows the location to Hamunaptra, and if he cuts him down, they'll give him a percent. They banter back and forth, throwing out numbers, and then eventually she tricks him into agreeing 25%, and then the warden orders the executioner to cut the rope. We meet up with our three heroes at a ship, and we see O'Connell with a fresh haircut, and Evie definitely likes this. They have a little bit of banter, and O'Connell swears it's real, and the warden shows up to piss everybody off. Rick chats with Jonathan and some American explorers he is playing poker with later that night on the boat, and they bet $500 they'll reach the city first. $500 between O'Connell's crew and the American crew. We see some Magi in a paddle boat coming towards the boat that everybody else is on. Rick then goes to talk with Evie, and he prepares his mobile armory. I mean, this guy travels, and he travels with a lot of guns. This movie couldn't take place today with all the firepower he had. And they chat while he loads his weapons. She asks him about the kiss, and he laughs it off. He said, I was about to be hanged. It seemed like a good idea at the time, which pisses her off. And after she storms off, he hears someone, right down the dock from him, and he goes over to find his former friend Benny, who is leading the Americans to Hamunaptra. Rick tosses Benny overboard when Benny makes a joke that Rick has more balls than brains for going back to Hamunaptra. Rick then sees wet footsteps and is puzzled because Benny is still in the water. In Evie's room, she's smitten with O'Connell. She's fantasizing about the kiss. You can tell it really had an effect on her. And while this is going on, she drops something, and when she bends over to pick it up, she is ambushed by one of the Magi asking for the map and a key. Rick comes in, and we get a pretty funny thing here. We see a candle like blowing before a window opens. We see a candle blowing. Rick turns, a window opens, and he shoots the fuck out of a Magi. However, during this, Rick shoots a candle lamp that was on the wall and accidentally, burning up the boat. We then get a big shootout on the boat. He tosses Evie overboard after asking her if she can swim, which is pretty funny. And he fights another Magi before jumping in over himself. And another pretty funny gag here is the warden asks O'Connell what they're going to do, and O'Connell says, "Wait here, I'll go get help." And he jumps in the water, and the warden's standing there, and then he realizes what happened. O'Connell was just kind of being a dick, and he jumps in the water after him. But then one of the Americans who also are taking part in the shootout saves Jonathan from being fucked up by one of the Magi that's on fire right after Jonathan recovers the key. It's the Magi that went in to get the key and the map off of Evie. Jonathan grabs it off the ground, and the Magi's coming back after him to get it. He's got kind of this weird thing on his hand and he puts like what looks like a sawzall blade in it. It's kind of weird, but I mean, I'm alright with it. They buy some camels the next morning, and Rick starts to get smitten with Evie after he sees her in some traditional Egyptian wear. The four ride across the desert, even in the night. Now, there are no streetlights or anything to light their way, so how the fuck can they possibly see? I go outside. I have a field behind my house. I go outside when it's dark, and I get out of the little like light I have off the back of my house that I can see, and I can't fucking see 5 feet in front of me. So I don't know how these fuckers saw in the desert with no lights at all. And furthermore, Ardith Bay says this one is strong, and he's referring to Rick. How the fuck can he possibly see his face from a cliff in the distance at night? Seriously, that desert would be fucking pitch black. And he remembered him? But, whatever. The next morning, Rick and his crew arrive right outside the city at the same time as Benny does. After the sunrise makes the city visible, you don't see the city at all. Then after the sun comes up, it kind of slowly like unravels itself. And as soon as it's visible, they all race there. Evie does end up winning the race and the $500. Rick steals a toolkit for Evie from one of the other crew members. From one of the members of the other crew. I believe his name was Burns. She uses ancient mirrors that catches the sun to light up a room underground. It's pretty cool. She tilts it towards the sun, and the sun catches it, and it lights up everything else. It's a pretty neat little gag. The two camps then draw guns on each other over a dig site after they initially scared each other. They heard Rick, Jonathan, the warden, and Evie went to a dig site, and they thought they heard voices, and then they turn the corner, and there's, the Americans, Benny, and the local crew they have helping them dig, and they get into it a little bit over the site, but Rick and Evie and Jonathan go find another site. And while they're doing this, the warden wanders off to explore. Rick, Evie, and Jonathan dig between the statue's legs from underneath the statue of Anubis. 3 of the diggers the Americans hired melt from salt acid as they try to open a compartment holding the Book of the Dead. They try to pull this panel out, it looks like, and while they're prying it out, acid, I guess, they said it was salt acid, just flies from out of there, and we learn that they melt. We see a little bit of them like being burned, and then it cuts. This is PG-13. Evie explains the mummification process to Rick while they're taking a break. And while this is going on, Jonathan is playing golf with rocks and an axe when suddenly a sarcophagus crashes through the ceiling. Evie realizes that the puzzle box is actually a key, and that she said this man must have been someone of great importance, or he'd done something very naughty. But before they can open the sarcophagus, the warden comes running and screaming down the hall and runs into a wall and dies. One of the flesh-eating scarabs entered his body. He mistook it for gold. He was using a knife to pry him out of the wall, and one fell on the ground, and it hatched out of its little shelving, I guess, and it dug its way into his boot and went inside his body. That night, the Magi show up and have a shootout at the camp before retreating when O'Connell threatens to blow them up with dynamite. The Magi tell them to leave this place. Rick teaches a drunk Evie how to throw a punch, and she goes on to explain that her father was a famous British explorer and her mother was an Egyptian. And we get just a little bit of more of her backstory. And she does go to kiss O'Connell, but she passes out first. It's pretty funny. And where her head lands, she definitely could have gave him quite a kiss. The next day, the American crew finally get their chest out of the wall, or out of the statue, rather. The Egyptologist, who, when he's not playing Richie Rich's butler, I guess, or building the Titanic, well, he's an actor. He played Richie Rich's butler in the movie Richie Rich, and he played Bruce Ismay in Titanic. His name's Jonathan Hyde. His real life name is Jonathan Hyde. Now, the Egyptologist reads a curse off of the chest, and the Diggers and Benny flee before they can open it. As the Americans open the chest, Rick, Jonathan, and Evie open the sarcophagus and find the mummy, and he's still juicy, and they discover he was buried alive after finding fingernail scratches and a message he inscribed, I guess, inside the casket that says, "Death is only the beginning." The Book of the Dead is inside the Americans' chest, and also some of the containers they used to store organs after mummification. Later that night, Evie figures out that the mummy was sentenced to the Hum Die, and that he was the only one in history to be sentenced to it, as she could find no other examples of it ever being used, and said they feared it. She also reveals that if he were to arise, he would bring with him the 10 plagues of ancient Egypt. Later, when everyone is asleep, she steals the Book of the Dead from the Egyptologist fella and uses the key to open it, the key that Jonathan found, or Rick found. She opens the book and reads a passage that awakens Imhotep. Locusts immediately flood the camp. One of the Americans falls and his eyeglasses get smashed. He's blind without them. Pretty much. He can see, but very, very blurry. Imhotep then steals his eyes and tongue. Rick, Evie, and Jonathan run from some of the flesh-eating scarabs. And she accidentally finds a trap door when she leans against a wall, and it puts her in the hall where Burns is. Burns and the Mummy, that is the name of the American that can't see. The Mummy calls her a Noxuna Moon and tries to kiss her. The Americans run through the hall with the Beatles following them. Rick and Jonathan do find Evie with the Mummy, and Rick shoots Imhotep and they flee. When they return to the surface, the Magi tell them to leave, and that they may have doomed the entire world. Rick thinks he killed him by shooting him, which is kind of funny, but, I don't know what else he would have thought, but... The Mummy finds Benny, and Benny recites prayers in different languages. He does the traditional, to me, the Christian prayer. And then he does, I believe he does Buddhist, and there's one other one he does in there before he does Hebrew, and Imhotep spares him, and he enlists him to help him find the other jars. Imhotep calls it the language of the slaves. I guess that's, because they built the pyramids and all that back in Imhotep's day. But back in Cairo, Rick and Evie argue about what they should do about the mummy. Rick wants to just leave, and Evie says they need to stay and, put him back in the grave. Rick goes to the bar and runs into Winston, a former Air Force pilot, complaining about not having any challenges left. He wishes that he would have died with his comrades in what they call the Great War, as World War II hadn't happened yet, and in that time in between World War I and World War II, they referred to World War I as the Great War. But Benny takes Imhotep to Burns, and Imhotep sucks him dry. At the bar, as everyone is enjoying a shot, we see everyone in the bar spit it out, and they say it tastes like blood. And they spit it out because apparently Imhotep has turned all the liquid into blood. I don't know if that's something he brought with him or if he did that intentionally, but yeah, he, instead of turning water into wine, he turned wine or liquor into blood. Rick storms into the American's room and he is confronted by the mummy. But the mummy splits and fucking takes off when he sees a cat, as he fears cats because they are the guardians of the underworld. They go to the museum, and Ardith and Terrence Bay, Evie's boss, and there's no... Evie's boss, Terrence Bay, is spelled B-A-Y, and Ardith Bay is B-E-Y, so I assume there's no relation. But at the museum, Ardith and Terrence explain Imhotep's past and the curse. Now back, and Evie tells them that Imhotep called her a Noxuna moon, and they figure that he's going to try and raise her from the dead, and he's going to use Evie as the human sacrifice. But we go back to the room, and Rick locks Evie in an adjoining room and has the two Americans stand guard while he and Jonathan go to find the Egyptologist. Now I'm calling them... O'Connell's the only American in his crew. I believe that Jonathan and Evie are both British and Egyptian mixed. So they refer to the other crew as the Americans, so that's why I've referred to them as that the entire time. They find Benny at the Egyptologist's office. Rick interrogates him, and Benny says Imhotep just wants the book and Evie. They hear screams outside, and Benny, I guess he kicks O'Connell in the nuts and just jumps out the window. But when Rick and Jonathan look outside, they find that Imhotep has killed the Egyptologist. Then Imhotep, I guess he has flies or whatever come out of his mouth, and all his orifices still, if that's how you say it, I don't fucking know. But he has flies come out of him that go to attack Rick and Jonathan, but they shut the window real quick. Imhotep leaves there, and he enters the Americans' hotel, where he takes the form of sand and sucks the life out of one of them, standing guard for Evie as the other one who went to go get them some drinks. He then goes into the room that Evie is locked in by again turning into sand and pouring through the keyhole, which is a pretty cool visual. And he calls her a Noxuna moon again and kisses her while she sleeps. Rick then opens the door and scares him off with a cat. The three of them, with the remaining American, return to the museum to try and find out where the Book of the Living is. It turns out that the Bembridge Scholars that Evie wanted to be a member of has mixed them up. And Evie deduces that the Book of the Living is buried in the statue of Horus. Jonathan runs to get the car and blends in with an army that Imhotep has of followers or whatever, but it's pretty hilarious. They're just walking, chanting Imhotep, and Jonathan just walks with them and quickly just shimmies to the back and runs to get the car. And they all end up joining in. They all get in the car, Rick, Evie, plus the American, and Ardith and Terrence. They mow down some of the army in the car, but the last remaining American is pulled out of the car, and Imhotep sucks the life out of him whenever he shows him the jar. And this fully regenerates Imhotep. And they say Ardith and the museum curator tell them that when he's fully regenerated, he won't fear the cats anymore. He'll be all powerful. Basically, he'll be at full capacity, and there's nothing they can do. Jonathan crashes the car, and then Imhotep corners them and tells Evie if she goes with him that he will let the rest of them live. O'Connell vows to Imhotep that he'll see him again. Evie leaves with Imhotep, and as soon as they are out of the mob, Imhotep orders his army to kill them all. Rick, Jonathan, and Ardith escape through a manhole as Evie's boss sacrifices himself, taking on the army so they can get away. The next morning, they then enlist Winston to fly them to Hamunaptra, which he does happily when Rick says it'll probably kill him. I have a little story, a little personal story about the first time I saw this movie at this part. Imhotep, Evie, and Benny spot the plane, and Imhotep summons a massive sandstorm that turns into a face. And as the face starts to swallow the plane, she kisses Imhotep and gets him to break his concentration. Now, my story here is the first time that I saw this movie, I went to the drive-in with my dad, and it was my dad, my brother, and I in his truck, and my dad's wife at the time, and I believe I don't know if both their other kids were there or just one, but she was going into labor with their last born, and she was having contractions. So the first time I saw this movie at the drive-in, it was at this part, at the climax of the movie, that we had to leave, and I didn't get to see the end of it for months and months until it came out on VHS, and then we rented it, fast-forwarded it to this part, and then, watched the end of it, and then I believe we rewatched it again. It's just kind of funny to look back on. It's something that I always think about, especially at this part, when I watch this movie, especially at this part. But after Evie kisses Imhotep to break his concentration, the plane crashes, but all survive except Winston, whose plane then sinks into the quicksand, just as he wanted. Back at Hamunaptra, Imhotep leads Evie to the room to perform the resurrection of Enoxuna Moon. While Jonathan, Rick, and Ardith are digging through some rubble, Jonathan has one of the scarab beetles enter his arm. It's while they're looking for the book. Rick gets it out. He digs it out with a knife and shoots it. Now, upon shooting the beetle, Imhotep hears them, and he awakens his priests. Rick, Jonathan, and Ardith find a treasure room and start shooting down the priests. That's where they start coming up through the floor, and they start cornering them, and they just shoot the shit out of them. Evie, who has apparently passed out since they got there, awakens and rolls over, sort of. She's chained up, but she looks over and finds herself chained next to Enoxuna Moon's corpse. Jonathan finds the statue, and he and Rick work to retrieve the book, eventually getting it, while Ardith seemingly sacrifices himself so they can save Evie. The priests are coming down a hall, and Ardith tells him to go save the girl, and he runs in all gung-ho. And it looks like he gets carried off by him. We don't see what happens. But Imhotep raises Enoxuna Moon's soul, but once again, before he can complete the ritual, Jonathan interrupts him, and during the distraction, Rick frees Evie from her chains and shackles. Jonathan reads an inscription and raises more mummies, and Imhotep commands the mummies Jonathan raised to kill them, while Rick fights, the mummies, while Enoxuna Moon tangles with Evie. After getting help from Evie with the last symbol on the inscription, he reads it and takes control of the mummies and commands them to kill Enoxuna Moon. Again, it's kind of funny because Jonathan's trying to ask her what the symbol is, and she's getting choked by Enoxuna Moon, and it's kind of funny gag, pretty funny actually. But just as Imhotep is about to kill Jonathan, Rick cuts his arm off. And after he turns his attention to Rick, Jonathan grabs the key from Imhotep's robe. We learn that Jonathan, earlier in the film, that Jonathan's a good pickpocket, whatever, because he stole the key from Rick, and I guess is one of his talents. They open the book and read an inscription that turns Imhotep mortal, and Rick stabs him through the stomach, killing him. And he walks down into this black tar pit looking thing, and we see him kind of sink down, and then he says death is only the beginning in ancient Egyptian, I imagine, and his face takes the form of his corpse when they first found him, of his bones, and he, disappears. Meanwhile, Benny, who has been taking treasure out of the treasure room, sets it on this lever he didn't know was a lever, and it sets off a booby trap that destroys the city. Now, after a mad dash, Rick, Jonathan, and Evie make it out. But Benny is not so lucky. Although Rick tries to save him, big giant stone doors start to come down, and Rick, Evie, and Jonathan make it out. He half-heartedly tries to save him, but whatever, no big loss. And as all the other doors close, we see one of the Beatles, and we see them all surrounding Benny, and his torch extinguishes, and we hear him screaming, and they're eating him. Yeah, that's what you get when you're a dick, so fuck you, Benny. Rick, Evie, and Jonathan make it out of the city as it implodes. Now, as they get to some camels, we see that Ardith survived, and he thanks the three of them, saying that they've earned his respect and the respect of his people. Jonathan bellyaches that, they're going home empty-handed, but Rick and Evie kiss and are quite happy with the way things turned out. And as we see Rick and Evie on one camel and Jonathan on another, as the camera pans around the camel, we see a sack of treasure on the side of the camel that Rick and Evie are on. So they got their treasure. And the credits roll. The positives: this movie is fun. The tone, the jokes, the acting's pretty good. It's not the best movie of all time, but I have a lot of affection for this movie. The story is good, the sets are great, the score is pretty good. This movie is just good, and it hits me right in the nostalgia. It's pretty awesome, in my opinion. I know it's not for everybody. I know actually a lot of people my age who don't like it or care for it or haven't thought about it in years, but we all have our favorites. The CGI does look dated. That's, as far as my negatives, the CGI looks dated. And we do go to Hamunaptra like 4 different times. There is a reason for it in the narrative, but we go there when Imhotep tries to resurrect an Moon in ancient times. When we cut to 1923 with Rick and the French Foreign Legion, that's where they are. And then Rick and Evie and them go back. And then after they leave and Imhotep abducts her and takes her back there to finish the ritual, we go back to Hamunaptra a 4th time. But, it's cool. It doesn't really bother me, but it's kind of funny how often we're there. Now, overall, I give it 2 thumbs up. Obviously. It's an awesome movie, and it's one of my favorites of the 90s. It's something I can put on and watch it, and it immediately takes me back to when I was a kid and first saw it. I think it kind of gets lost because we did have Star Wars that year. Star Wars Episode 1, the first of the new prequel trilogy, though we all know how that ended up. We had The Matrix that year, so I think it kind of gets lost in the shuffle a little bit, but I think it's an awesome movie. But will we see more of the same when I cover The Mummy Returns next week? Well, you'll have to tune in to find out. I do have a Facebook page, The Leighton Cassette, so if you could please drop me a like on Facebook, and I have a Twitter, The Leighton Cassette. If you just put it in your search machine there, The Leighton Cassette, and I'd appreciate a follow. But that's all I got for this week, and next week I will be back with The Mummy Returns.